Hello everyone and welcome to the Principal's Playbook. I am Dr. Michael Bishop, a retired Virginia educator. I have 31 years of experience in public education with the last 17 as a high school principal. This series focuses on real-world leadership lessons, lessons about culture, expectations, follow-through, and the daily decisions that shape a school. Those things don't always show up in preparation programs. In today's episode, we're talking about structure, because every successful organization, team, and school has one thing in common: clear structure. Students need structure to learn, teachers and staff need structure to work effectively, and leadership teams need structure to function with trust, clarity, and purpose. I believe this applies directly to administrative teams. Roles must be defined, expectations must be clear, and time together must be purposeful. Just like a strong coaching staff, leadership works best when strategies are clear, responsibilities are shared, and everyone is prepared to execute and provide feedback. When structure is missing, dysfunction quickly follows. When you're putting an administrative team together, the goal isn't control, it's capacity. Sometimes you inherit a team, and in those first few weeks, your job is to learn who they are, how they work, and what strengths they bring. Again, going back to what we've talked about with Simon Sinek, who, what, and why. Connecting those three things is purposeful. You don't walk in and torch everything that existed before you arrived. As the leader, you don't have to make every decision, but you do set the expectation for how decisions are made. One of the best lessons I learned was this: don't just bring me the problem, bring me possible solutions. The routine decisions can be handled within your role. The bigger decisions, the one that could create issues later, we talk through together and then we decide how we're going to handle it. That decision making must live within a clear framework: the school's mission, shared expectations, and the policies of the school division you work in. Those policies are the ultimate guardrails. They support decisions, they limit decisions, and they protect everyone involved. When roles are clear and boundaries are understood, leadership becomes shared, accountable, and effective. And when people share in leadership, they also share in responsibility, owning mistakes as much as successes. That's how trust is built, and that's what allows a leadership team to function without constant supervision. As you'll see in the next slide, clarity builds capacity. So one of the most important things you need to consider is that you need to make sure you're real clear with your team so that you can create capacity for leadership with them. You need to build your team around the potential they hold, not just the position they are in. You need to learn that team before making any major changes, and you can help define who decides what when decisions come back to the group. One of the most important things I learned from Brenda Mayo was I needed to come in the room. If I had a problem in my hands, I needed to have a solution to provide to her. Share ownership of the decisions within the mission and policy boundaries of the school and the division. It's really important to consider when roles are clear, leadership can be shared without losing accountability. I've always believed my role as the leader is set the direction, to define the big picture, and then work with my team to make it happen. That means providing clear reasons, data when appropriate, and creating buy-in. Solutions aren't about control. They're opportunities to think together and decide what works best in the situation. Teams change every year. Roles shift, but success comes from everyone understanding that their role and how they work together within the structure you've created helps lead to success. We can't control every situation, but we can control how we respond. Again, let me say that very clearly. We can't control the situation, but we can control how we respond. And when you're making decisions, there are three questions you should always ask. How does this impact students? How does this impact staff? And how does this impact the building as a whole? Which brings us to another point to consider. Take a look here at what happens when you sit in the big chair. One of the most important things you need to consider is that you need to make sure you're real clear with your team so that you can create capacity for leadership with them. You need to build your team around the potential they hold, not just the position they're in. You need to learn that team before making any major changes, and you can help define who decides what when decisions come back to the group. One of the most important things I learned from Brenda Mayo was I needed to come in the room. If I had a problem in my hands, I needed to have a solution to provide to her. Share ownership of the decisions within the mission and policy boundaries of the school and the division. It's really important to consider when roles are clear, leadership can be shared without losing accountability. Early in my first principalship, I made the mistake of trying to control everything. I didn't yet understand how to structure administrative meetings, how to delegate effectively, how to use my secretary, I'd never had one, or rely on my team. I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't have the systems in place to get there, and it was exhausting. As I grew, I learned that leadership isn't about doing everything yourself. It's about creating structure, trusting others, and being mindful of how your actions are interpreted. Never forget what it was like to be in the classroom, because perspective matters. Each year I made it a priority to give people opportunities to lead, building on their strengths and stretch them beyond their comfort zones. At the end of the year, I gathered feedback from the team. And about year 5, as I've spoken about before, I began holding what I called Clint Eastwood meetings with my administrative team and department chairs, while my secretary did the same with office and support staff. We looked at good, bad, and ugly, or what worked, what didn't work, and what we could change. We looked for patterns. We looked for how people felt about the school, how the team functioned, and what the data was telling us about instruction and student performance. We also looked at how our actions were interpreted by others. So when you think about future leaders, take a look at this slide, and we'll talk about it when we're done here, of what you have to do to help them be potential of others. In other words, providing intentional leadership opportunities that build on their strengths and stretch their growth. Those real responsibilities, not just titles, to develop leadership skills, help that person when they walk out of your building and they go to interview for another position. You need to gather feedback and data to guide growth and improvement. In other words, one of those Clint Eastwood meetings needs to be held at the end of the year. And then you have a personal conversation with that person when you're doing their evaluation. Tasks should be matched to talent so that we can build capacity. And the key thing here is great leaders don't wait for talent to appear. They develop it with purpose and with structure. So as you saw in that slide, great leaders don't wait for talent to appear. They develop it with purpose and structure. A high school runs hundreds of events across the school year, and a principal cannot oversee everything. But success comes from structure, clear agendas, follow-through, consistent procedures, and strong communication, not just amongst that team, but amongst everyone in the building. Like any successful team, you must use people's strengths to maximize effectiveness. That means putting them in a position that best builds upon their own leadership strengths. I also believe that it was my responsibility to create leadership opportunities for teachers who were pursuing an administrative degree. Whether it was leading the tardy team or supervising events or managing a credit recovery program, these experiences gave them real examples to share in interviews. The strongest candidates don't just talk about the job they have, they demonstrate the readiness they want for the job they're interviewing for. One of your most important leadership responsibilities as a principal is not just modeling leadership, but developing it in others. When you define roles, you create clarity and trust your team to think and act independently. You're building a school that doesn't rely on one person. I used to remind my team often, if something unexpected happens, if I die on the way to school, someone must step up and keep the ship moving forward. If you've built the right structure, it won't miss a beat. Building your team allows you to build on their strengths. You can often spot those strengths in the interview if you structure your questions intentionally. But once the year begins, you really learn what people can handle and where they need support. That understanding is what allows you to create the structure, not just for people, but for how work gets done. When roles are clear, Meetings become clearer too. Structure drives how decisions are made, how problems are handled, and how difficult situations are addressed throughout the day, the week, and the year. Without structure, meetings drift. With structure, they become productive. One of the most important pieces about structure was that our leadership meetings followed a constant and consistent format, starting with a discussion about safety and security, weekly events, technology concerns, counseling, and operational issues. We separated instructional meetings into dedicated, specific time frames where just instruction was talked about. And that allowed us to focus in on trends, implementation, and fidelity without crowding the agenda. Plus, the other people in the room didn't necessarily need to listen to those things. The separation made both types of meetings much more effective. Shorter meetings are always better. We held a structured Monday morning meeting and aimed to finish within an hour. Team members came prepared with updates on the areas that they supervised or tasks that they had been challenged with, which replaced the idea that everything had to come from me. That structure allowed me to listen, provide direction, adjust when needed, and ensure our philosophy showed up in practice. So take a look at this slide. We'll talk about structure here in a second. So what is the most important thing for an administrative meeting? Well, the weekly leadership meeting agenda needs to have specific topics that you follow to the letter every week so you get into a routine. We always started ours with a safety and security update, meaning any upcoming events, any concerns, any things that were going on in the building, so that we had a good control and a good picture of what we needed to do that week. Weekly events, athletics, activities, any supervision. I allowed my assistant principals to meet out of the administrative meeting so they could decide who was going to cover what. Student services, counseling, attendance, emerging concerns. There might be something coming up with scheduling. There might be something coming up that you have to take care of with student services. Whatever it is, you need to make sure you're on top of it. Operations and technology. What's going on with the facilities? Are there any air conditioning issues? Classroom problems? Do we have enough desks? That kind of stuff. When we were overcrowded, we had to have conversations about how do we make sure kids get safely from outside the building to the trailers and back in cold weather. And then last thing is action items and follow-up, things that were from a previous meeting, or there's something that you had to talk about from a previous agenda. How are you going to make sure you talked about that? The same structure you saw depicted there is carried into your assistant principal meetings, department chair meetings, and faculty meetings. Consistency matters, following the same structure so they know what to expect when they come in the room. When everyone understands that format, expectations, and purpose, productivity will increase. Strong schools don't run on meetings. They run on well-structured meetings that respect time, trust people, and move forward. So think about what goes where, what meeting covers what topic. Take a look at this and we'll talk about it here in a second. So you have to think about what goes where and what type of meeting you're having. Because when you have different types of meetings going on in your building, and there should be different responsibilities and different people who go. So for the weekly administrative meeting, obviously the principal and the administrative team. Instructional leadership, that could be my APs or it could be me. It just depended. I wanted them to develop their own capacity to talk about performance of students so that when they had conversations with their own teachers that they were supervising, they could point out the differences instead of just saying, Dr. Bishop says. AP coordination, such as the AP coordinator, when a test's being given, how many kids have to take care of this. Once we started giving the SAT in our building, we had to have a coordinated plan for that, and how to use the software and what responsibilities were going to happen. All of that kind of stuff has to go into that meeting. And then you have a department chair meeting. It should follow the basic format of your administrative meeting, and then your faculty meetings. Everybody's there, and it should follow the same format that you did in the previous meeting that we talked about. So that brings us to the end of this episode. But before we wrap up, I want to connect today's conversation back to something that I emphasize in the book, What They Don't Teach in Principal School, available on Amazon. The link is in the description of this video. Please take a look at it. It is very productive, and I wrote it because I think people need some help sometimes, and it provides a lot of suggestions. So what I emphasize in that book is that structure isn't just about roles. It's about how work actually gets done. Productive leadership teams stay on topic, they respect time, and they focus on solutions rather than ego. The best ideas should always win, no matter who brings it forward, and every discussion should end with a clear next step. As we said, meetings, when they drift, they get wasted. When agendas are ignored and start to talk about personal issues, frustration builds. But when that meeting is structured, disciplined, and action-oriented, leadership becomes shared, trust grows, and school runs more effectively. That structure, clear roles, focused meetings, and consistent follow-through is what turns good intentions into real results. So take a look here at our takeaways from the episode. Well, structure clearly helps to create clarity. In roles, in meetings, in daily operations, it's important that you have structure. Clear expectations for your staff and follow-through turns the team into leaders. I'm proud to say I've had 34 people in a 17-year career who went on to become leaders in a different position once they left my building. Productive meetings drive execution. Don't just sit there and talk and debate and ramble on and get into arguments. If there's something that you need to talk about off topic, do so. When structure is intentional, success becomes sustainable. And that's the key you need to take away from follow-through. As I said, the ideas that we discussed around structure, roles, and leadership development and productive meetings are all drawn from the book What They Don't Teach in Principal School, which is available on Amazon. The link in the episode is provided in the link in this episode is provided in the description, and the book is designed to be a practical companion to this series. I want to remind you, lead with purpose, listen with intention, and remember, success comes before work only in the dictionary. Until next time, I'm Dr. Michael Bishop, and we'll see you in the future.